This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal. Clarenville, Newfoundland, 1978. It was a bright evening under the light of a near full moon, as Mr. and Mrs. Lethbridge, local residents of a neighborhood near Marine Drive, were walking home from a night of visiting with their friends down the street. They had had a few drinks, but had kept the evening relatively tame, and had decided to walk home along the water's edge. A few minutes later, they reached their home, and it being the wee hours of the morning, decided to go straight to sleep, instead of watching the usual repeat of the evening news, a nightly ritual that always made them sleepy. As Mr. Lethbridge rounded the banister ready to head up the stairs, he noticed a dark object through the front living room window. Something hanging above Random Island, lying just east of his home looking out towards the Atlantic. Curious, Mr. Lethbridge stepped outside to get a better look, and was stunned with absolute shock at what he thought he saw. Moments later, his wife too came outside, wondering why the door had been left ajar. But before she could even ask, she too was awestruck at the massive, unidentifiable object hovering over the island. The sightings of unidentified craft at Clarenville would strangely become one of the most prolific UFO stories in Canadian history, and furthering the conversation surrounding these strange occurrences, such as Charlie Red Star in Manitoba, the Falcon Lake Incident, and numerous other unexplainable UFO events. Join us on Into the Portal for a look at one of Newfoundland's strangest UFO sightings ever recorded, and a trip back to 1978.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back with a brand new episode, and we're diving into the world of ufology this week, hey?
Yeah, coming back around to that again. It's been a little while, so I'm excited.
I'm super pumped on this one. Quick housekeeping, of course. We've got a few new reviews this week.
Yeah. Thank you so much, you guys.
Yeah, it's so
awesome.
funny. Whenever we get like a negative review or like a not so good review, we always get like a really, just like a slew of awesome ones right after. And so
we just... do. You guys are the best.
Really,
seriously. Yeah. You always know how to lift us back up, even though we weren't feeling down about it or anything. But it's just nice to get so much positive feedback. You guys are awesome, so we always appreciate the reviews. So it was from Stores 315, Art Geek Mom, and Timmy G is awesome. Smoking 5-star reviews, and that was all on the American iTunes. And as always, if you guys are from another country around the world and we haven't given you a shout out or anything, we haven't checked. I
comb through a few, but
we comb through, but there's a lot of iTunes. There's
a
lot. So anyway, if we've missed you, let us know. But we do have another little bit of an update, too, on the...
Yeah, okay, so we just we were really stoked on Friday. We received some of the prize pack from Kryptonaut Podcast.
Yes, we did, yeah.
So, yeah, we've got some really cool things we kind of put together. So, like we said, we're going to be doing the mug-based prize pack, but there's going to be lots of goodies in there.
It's kind of funny because, of course, it's a Halloween prize, but you'll be getting it closer to Christmas time. But
it'll be
it'll be the end of the month, hopefully. But shipping always takes a long time.
Oh shoot!
But we anyway, we're excited to put those together. Yeah, magnets and pins and stickers from Kryptonaut, and then same deal from us. We got some cool stuff and candy, so I'm excited to send those off.
Yeah. Me too. And then,
is there anything else for housekeeping here? I can't remember. Oh, yeah. 2 new episodes up on Patreon.
Yep.
Sweet.
Yeah.
We, one of them is more of a historical mystery. The other is cryptozoological. So nice variety for you guys on Patreon. So go check it out. It's just / into the portal.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you who, I know that we always mention Patreon, just, casually or whatever, but for those of you who aren't really that familiar with Patreon, basically, it's just a place where creators can gain a community, have their sort of base follow them and support them. And it's fun, right? You can do it per project. You can do it per month. That's kind of what we do, is per month. And it's just a really fun way to connect and support your favorite creators. So
definitely. And it's been a huge help. Like, it covers our website costs and it covers a few of our other costs for the show. So it's a huge help. You guys keep the lights on. So it's, it's great.
All right, Andrew, let's
ready to
dive into
in?
this.
Cool.
Yes.
So, like Amber said off the top, we are heading back into the UFOlogy realm, and but we're sticking in the Great White North, of course. We kind of had to. You really wanted to do a Canadian UFO case, so
I did.
Well, we both did. We both wanted to cover another UFO event, but I feel like most of the familiar ones are not Canadian. So it's
true
for the most part, anyway. But today we're heading over to Newfoundland, and an event that took place on there's a few different variant accounts, but on October 26th, 1978, in the rural harbor town of Clarenville, Newfoundland. So the initial report came in of a UFO over the police radio, and this was pretty early in the morning. And it came in from a man by the name of Chester Lethbridge, who was with his wife and a few of the other locals at the time, and they had spotted something anomalous in the sky. And this was the second time in less than 2 weeks that the couple had actually sighted an unidentified object. I'm reluctant at this stage to say craft, because I don't know if that's how they phrased it at the time.
If it's how they perceived it even.
Right.
It's interesting though, like you say, like there was some discrepancy with the dates, right? Some of the articles, I think this was a misnomer. They would say November 26th, but that seems to be a mistake on the part of secondary sources, because you will see Blackwood refer repeatedly to the night of October 26th / morning of the 27th.
Right.
So that was kind of interesting, I thought, but
Yeah, no, there's always subtle discrepancies with these cases, and that kind of adds to the... I mean, it makes it more interesting sometimes, and sometimes it's frustrating.
Adds to the myth of the story.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes on like this. RCMP officer Jim Blackwood was the first guy on the scene. He was the one who was contacted over the radio, and fully expecting the locals to have gotten into too much drink the night before. A little bit of moonshine, a little bit of possibly some hallucinations or just misidentification, right? But what he saw when he got there would change his life. It would totally change how he perceived the UFO phenomena. So this part's crazy. The sighting lasted approximately 2 hours, which is extremely long time for a UFO sighting, obviously. The craft was visible on, just above the water over top of Random Island, Newfoundland, for basically the entire duration of that 2 hours. And Blackwood became the centerpiece of this story because he was there for the entire time and basically trying to make heads or tails of what he was looking at with these people.
Basically,
So the story basically exploded after he came back and reported this to his superiors, basically.
So most of what remains of this story is derived from Blackwood's official account. He was interviewed quite extensively in the aftermath of this incident, and he added a lot of credibility to this, I'll say, and a lot of newspapers commented on that as well. But essentially this is his account from the interview. And this interview is available on YouTube. We will make this a part of our sources, but this is just a recap of what he had to say. So this was his words. He said October 27th, so that's the wee hours of the morning of the 27th.
Right.
He received a call from a resident that a UFO had appeared in the sky of some kind. At the time, Blackwood was actually stationed on the other side of town, so he had to drive down what's Marine Drive. I'm assuming that's like the main stretch.
Yeah, along the water or something, right?
Exactly, where he met the resident. He looked at the sky when he arrived on the scene and saw an object coming from the west heading east. And he described it as approximately 2,000 to 3,000 feet in altitude.
Okay.
At this time, he just thought it was a jet flying overhead because it wasn't moving erratically. It was just kind of, it was meandering across the sky. So essentially, once the resident, a Mr. Lethbridge, I believe, Chester Lethbridge, gave him some binoculars, he started to notice that there was something strange and that the object actually halted over the harbor. So actually, was it a harbor? I'm
sure there is a harbor there.
It's kind of
essentially like...
I think it's just a passageway, though.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? Like, Newfoundland is an amalgamation of, like, a large island, and then there's also mainland, and then there's sort of scattered little mini islands in between.
So Random Island is one of those islands. So essentially the craft was stationed high up in the sky, thousands of feet in altitude. But it was approximately over this island.
Right.
What is this reminding you of a little bit? We got a UFO over water. I'll just let you guys at home ponder that. But essentially, yeah. So Blackwood could not identify this object. And he was an aviation enthusiast, so it's not as if he wasn't well-versed with these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so he actually sent a dispatch, and he asked them to bring an industrial telescope that the police had for drug investigations, that type of thing. And
stakeout equipment.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. Spy equipment.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. So I guess one of his buddies from the detachment came down with the telescope, and they started to observe this object. And so they mounted it, set it all up, and this gave off, like, obviously, like, a lot more detail and a lot more scope than... scope. What do you even call it? Magnification, I guess?
Well, and just know. Just greater detail. They could just
see.
They could just see it more clearly than sort of a foggy lens of an older pair of binoculars, essentially.
Exactly.
Right?
So he had a lot better capabilities for witnessing this object and describing what he saw. And so essentially, what he first noticed were the blue lights. Right. And these were stationed on either side of the object. The object itself was described as oval shaped. So it's circular, more of like an oblong circle, not completely circular.
Yeah, like I would say, okay, like here's the...
It's circular, it's
the
not
best way I can
circular.
describe it for you guys like listening at home is like Blackwood does draw, and it's a very rudimentary little sketch, obviously, right? Yeah. But essentially what it looked like to me when I first saw it was like a Zeppelin, like a blimp.
Totally.
Type shape, right?
And yeah, I did see other accounts and varying descriptions where it was like described as a classic cigar shape, but I feel like that had to do with your perspective, like where you were seeing it in the sky.
Right.
So yeah, so essentially he made the call, this isn't a plane. It's a UFO.
And yeah, so they're observing this thing from the same position that they met these people. I just want to say Chester Lethbridge. What a name!
I want to say the Chestertons because of that episode of Murder She Wrote.
Oh my God! Watched. It's been a while since we had a Murder She Wrote reference on the show. There you go. There you go, everybody. No shame at all.
None at all.
So he's looking at this thing, and what he noticed was that the bottom half of the object was completely illuminated by a white light, but that it wasn't really like shining out. It was just the hull, so to speak, of whatever this was not bright and shiny, but that there was some sort of a light there. It was illuminated. It's almost like a dull, light. Like I'm picturing like a dull light, like those bulbs where it's like it doesn't really shine out. It's just kind of a matted, soft type light. So that's what I'm picturing. And at this time, he said that he observed this and that those blue lights that you just mentioned were flashing really rapidly on either side and more rapidly than anything else that he had ever seen before. And he basically made the statement in the interview that aircraft, like when you look up in the air and you see like a 747 going over you, there's some blinking lights, especially at nighttime, obviously, right? But it's not
multicolored too.
Sure, but
like red and white.
But they're not like flashing like a strobe light and like switching from one side to the other and like you know what I mean? Like this was very random. There was nothing he recognized. He basically said there's no commercial craft that would ever use their lights in that way because that wouldn't make any sense. So he watched it at max range for some time, focusing on the top at this point, trying to figure out like what shape this actually was. What was the shape of this craft? It was roughly oval, like you said, but it had this weird triangular shape at the back, sort of similar to a plane tail, but he said that it was much, much smaller than what, the what's the proper term? I don't even know. The fin of a plane, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It wasn't, it was way too small to make sense.
It's interesting, too, because, like oval shape with the triangle shape on the back. I've actually seen other varying descriptions where it says it's actually on the top of the craft. So coming off of the top. Oh, like, so you mean like it's not even attached? Like it's hovering off the top? No, like it was coming off the top. Right, yeah. So like it's at the back or it's at one end is what I mean to say, I guess. It's at one far end. So picture a blimp and this thing's like, it's like a shark tail at the one end of the blimp, essentially, is what I'm trying to, I don't really know if that's the end or the front or, right, because he didn't know either. He's not making heads or tails. And I have some thoughts on that, but we're going to save that for theories. Cool. So yeah, like he was thinking that his mind was playing tricks on them and that maybe it was a combination of a plane and then, possibly a falling star. He stated that
That's about all I can tell you about it. The size appeared to me to be a little larger than a 747 aircraft, a few hundred feet in size, no wings, the style was clear, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. So this is early in the morning, but I guess he's still able to, tell. He's an aviation enthusiast, so he's being like, no wings, but about a little larger than a 747, so that's pretty big.
That is huge.
Yeah. So it turned around as he watched it, so this is when it starts to move. And he was able to see each side of it. So before he was only viewing it from one side. Mm-hmm. So at this point it was moving really, really slow, but then made quick movements up and down, but always returning to the exact same spot it was hovering.
So it definitely has those erratic movements that are characteristic of a
non-ballistic motion.
Kind of reminds me of Charlie Red Star a little bit.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Blackwood stated repeatedly that he saw no windows and no doors, but he did say that, and this is a quote from the interview, it was definitely a metallic structure, but what type of metal I wouldn't care to guess. It was a dull metal. It was like a dull metal. And then he said, another quote here, I am familiar with aircrafts of all shapes and sizes, but the metal on it was not like aircraft metal. It was very dull and not shiny at all. It wasn't even smooth. It was very coarse looking.
That's weird.
That's like almost like a concrete. Like a dull gray coarse material.
I never thought about that.
Isn't that weird?
That's interesting though, like a porous, like non-smooth surface. You would think, for like the purpose of being aerodynamic in the air, you would want a smooth shape. Yeah. Design.
That's odd. And actually, I don't know if we've come across that in other cases.
We've definitely seen the dull metallic descriptions. We've never seen
the roughness potentially.
This is unique to this case.
Right. So at this point in time, that same light that I had mentioned before was getting brighter. And it was so bright that he was actually having trouble seeing the underside of the craft, which is basically the last frontier that he hadn't got a good view on.
You'd think that'd be the first thing you'd get a good view on, though.
Not necessarily, though, right? Because you're not
viewing it from the ground,
but you're not directly underneath it, though.
Yeah.
So you're viewing it from the side. You might get a section of the underside, but it's like you're from like a 45-degree angle is what I'm picturing.
It's funny too because the way he describes it is like an oval. He doesn't. And then he does draw like that blimp-like kind of shape, but he doesn't describe it as like the classic like two plates put together or like a pancake or like that type of thing where it's like it could be like two concave lenses kind of put together so that maybe but that to me would make the underside of the craft much more visible, right? Because it's kind of protruding out the bottom.
Yeah.
But maybe this is a case where it's not doing that. Maybe this is a case where it's very similar to an incident we covered before in the podcast, the Maury Island incident, where essentially it was donut-shaped craft.
Right.
Shaped craft.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't talk. And they spewed out all this weird slag-like materials, right? And that metallic paper. So maybe what we are seeing is some sort of weird... something opening up from the inside of the craft.
Possibly.
Potentially. Because we are getting more similarities, right? Which we'll get into further with the idea that this craft is over water.
Yeah.
So that is a significant element
Definitely.
when you're examining these cases, I think.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. One of the really curious things about this case is that we mentioned this loosely at the beginning, is that this had been reported just a few weeks earlier by the same couple, the Lethbridges. And at this point in time, they're in their mid-40s. They're not like old kooks in their 90s saying I saw a UFO, even though your bifocals are, as thick as a freaking whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't even know. This can be kind of taken a number of different ways, but according to Blackwood, Blackwood seemed like he thought they were genuine. And obviously, like, before he got there. And then...
well, he had a healthy dose of skepticism, too, right? Because he was just like, they're probably just partying and they're seeing stuff that's not there.
Right.
Which is fine, right? If you're a police officer, you have to go in with that kind of attitude. Right. Because if you're not, then it's hard to be objective about anything. But it's interesting, like, these people, they had seen this multiple times in a period of under 2 weeks. They were never officially interviewed, I don't believe. And that, to me, is kind of interesting... because of the fact that I don't know what their credibility is like. Maybe they are a couple of friggin' weirdos.
Well, that's just it. We don't know. Yeah, we really don't know.
But the fact of the matter is, a police officer got involved and basically confirmed what they were saying. Right. So it doesn't really matter whether or not they were interviewed or not. But anyways. Right. So yeah, as this case, so this is still going on, right?
Yep.
This is such a weirdly long incident. And I think it was drawn out because unless they had a boat, they weren't able to get any closer, right? So how are they going to...
This was all they really had.
Are they going to provoke it? Is it going to notice them? Or are we going to, so this is where it starts to get even more interesting. Because Blackwood decides he's going to try and contact this craft. He actually started using his high beam cruiser headlights. And it was basically doing like Morse code all, like, I don't even know if he was actually spelling out words or anything, but he was just blinking it on and off just to get a reaction.
Yeah, try to get something.
And sure enough, this thing started mimicking him.
Interesting.
So you can interpret this in two ways, I believe. You can interpret it as an intelligence coming back and responding, or you can look at it as like perhaps the materials of the craft were such that they would provide that reflection back. So these are high beams. Like, I'm not sure. Like, but again, though, this is 2,000 to 3,000 feet up in the air.
Yeah, you're not going to get a reflection back. That's
you would think. Unless because it is nighttime, it is hard to determine those distances. So again, there could be some discrepancy there.
Possibly.
But I just found this so interesting because, this mimics, it parallels a lot of other UFO cases.
Yeah.
And yeah, so essentially this, we've discussed this before, and I'm sorry for all of our regular listeners who aren't a part of our Patreon community, because we did do this really awesome UFO case called Charlie Red Star, and that was a Manitoba UFO case that occurred over an extensive period. It was over 2 years.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, or no, sorry, it was 1970s.
1970s as
76 to 77, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Interesting. So that's close to this.
It is really close to this. And Charlie was known, that's what they called him, Charlie. He was known for doing just that, right? If you tried to communicate with him, if you flashed your flashlight at him, he would usually respond by either, because he was known to glow, the whole craft would glow, and so he would glow brighter, or he would just shoot beams at the people, and he was very playful. Yeah. It's almost just like some sort of not childlike, but just like very whimsical kind of thing. So essentially, this this officer decides he's just gonna try it. Why not, right?
Yeah,
we're all here. We're all just standing around in the middle of the dark in the morning, so let's see. But actually, the guy that initially reported it, Lethbridge, got kind of upset. He was like, "What are you doing? Stop that! Do you want to antagonize this thing?" So
he was concerned. He was more of the mind that an invasion or something along those lines.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. He was taking the cautionary approach. But essentially, he continued on, Blackwood, and it was interesting. Like, the way that I kind of pictured this in my head was like, I feel like this is almost like cuttlefish-like. Is kind of my thought.
I saw that note you added in there. That is interesting.
Yeah, because cuttlefish, if you watch any Planet Earth or the deep sea one that they do, they have these very interesting ways of transforming and manipulating colors to different effects to kind of convey different messages and communicate with their surroundings. Yeah. So I was kind of thinking maybe this is I don't even know, another version of that. Yeah. But that was just my weird little thought.
No, that isn't even that weird of a thought. That ties into the fringy idea of UFOs almost being entities in and of themselves.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily biological, how we perceive biological on Earth or whatever, but in some way, shape, or form. And that's why maybe, it would communicate with lights. Yeah. Like a Charlie.
Exactly. Just
that's
like Charlie.
That's an interesting idea. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So this starts happening. Blackwood's flashing away his beams, and the craft takes off at this point.
Sorry, you just made me... I just picture Blackwood's flashing away his beams. He's just standing there, freaking flashing the UFO, trying to get a reaction. Anyway, sorry, I just
trying to stir something.
I just pictured that in my head. This guy Blackwood, and if you watch the video, you'll chuckle because it's
super credible. Yeah. So essentially, this is when the craft decided to exit the scene, and essentially, it did that by just vertical shooting out into the ether, the atmosphere, whatever, and just gone. Yeah. Just like that. And that, again, is very classic. We've seen that in a few others, and all of you UFO enthusiasts, you were probably, picking up those little strands of parallels as we go.
Definitely.
So essentially, Blackwood, like we said before, he became the centerpiece of this whole story, and for about 2 solid weeks, he was conducting interviews, he was on the phone, he was talking to CBC, BBC, you name it, he was on it. Yeah. And that was pretty crazy if you think about it. Like,
well, and it wasn't even him. The interesting part about that is, like, it wasn't him choosing to. Like, his superiors were like, you do it. You go, CBC asks you for an interview, you give the interview.
He wanted to sweep it under the rug, kind of. He was just like, and that was an interesting thing about Blackwood. We're going to talk about his credibility more so, but yeah, just that idea, right? That he wasn't just ranting and raving about this thing. It was through official channels. He never became obsessed with UFOs after this.
Right.
It was just something that happened to him.
Yeah.
And he's never really been able to explain it. So I thought that adds to his credibility.
Definitely lends to his credibility. Of course, we talked about Charlie Red Star and some of those comparisons before this recording and stuff, but I didn't think about the dates, which is so silly because I brought up some other examples in and around the same time. But I wonder if Blackwood was at all aware of the events in Manitoba just the previous year. So
I wonder.
76 is when that all started up, right?
We never came across anything like that.
Like and of course things weren't as well known, from coast to coast back in the 70s. You weren't catching it on social media and things like that. You were either reading it in the paper or you had to be watching that particular news bulletin. But still, I wonder, because if he would have had any other influences at all. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Because even if you do happen to see something on, say, the news, you see like a picture, say, that someone's drawn, very similar to the one that he drew, right? That was very rudimentary, like we said. But again, like, you see images like that go around, and then who knows what kind of influence that can have on someone's mind when they encounter something unknown, per se.
Definitely. It's so funny, too, when I looked at that sketch and how simple it is, and it just immediately, this is off topic, but it just immediately reminded me of Brian and Angelo from Double Density and the drawing of Cressy from Lake Crescent, and it's just like a stick. It's just like a stick with a
the
tiny
official,
little head on the
Wikipedia.
end. That's like the official drawing of Cressy. It's like, wow, Pablo Picasso. But kind of the same thing with Blackwood's drawing.
I wonder if that's Rob.
Funny.
Oh, wait, no, does Rob have a Cressy account on?
Somebody has, we don't know who it is. Someone has a Champ from Lake Champlain.
That's
Twitter.
Rob.
Is it? Well, don't give it away.
Oh.
Although I'm pretty sure he already did many times. So.
From our strange guys.
Right, yeah, right.
Okay.
Anyway, actually that's fitting. We should be giving him a shout out on this episode anyway. So shout out to Rob Christofferson from Our Strange Skies.
Yeah, the UFO
He's our go-to
expert.
UFO guy. Mm-hmm. So do you want to give a quick kind of a recap, description recap?
I think that's important because there's a lot going on with this craft in particular. And we've said different shapes. We said ovals, we said triangles, we said tails, we said lights, we said not lights, we said balls. So let's just get this straight. Okay, so essentially we are looking at either, well, it doesn't have to be either or, but classic cigar-shaped craft or the pie plate shape, but more oval than circular.
Yeah.
Big, so we're talking roughly the size of a commercial, not a commercial jet, but like a Boeing 747 jet.
Passenger jet.
A passenger jet.
Yeah.
There you go. And I don't actually know the actual footage of that.
Big.
It's big. Okay. It's huge. Okay. But anyways, yeah, so another important aspect about this craft was this triangle-shaped tail. And like we mentioned, we didn't actually say this, but this was a quote from Blackwood too, and he basically said it kept turning from left to right. So it's kind of like, almost like wiggling. And
Weird.
I think that kind of corresponds with what he said about how it was kind of like moving a little bit erratically, and it was sort of turning and whatever. So yeah, so this tail was essentially accentuating that movement. And in other sources, I saw it described as a pyramid-shaped tail.
Right.
So they're both triangles, but that's interesting, right? If they're... Obviously, it's a three-dimensional object, so it's going to be a pyramid.
It's just a question of how three-dimensional. Like, if you picture, like, the tail
really
of a plane, it's like, sure, it's three-dimensional, but if compared that to, like, an actual symmetrical pyramid.
We've come across... remember that crazy article we saw that was, like... Basically, a giant pyramid was floating in the sky. Oh, no, it wasn't a pyramid. It was a giant cube.
Ooh,
Do you remember that? And it almost picked up a girl off of, like, she almost got, like teleported into it.
I vaguely remember that.
That's insane. If anyone's curious about that one, just look up floating cube. But anyways, yeah, so we've got this pyramid-shaped tail or triangle-shaped tail. We have a description of a dull metallic color.
Yep.
Rough-looking, not smooth. Mm-hmm. And we've got no doors, no windows, which is kind of weird.
Right.
But multiple lights. And these were described by using high-powered binoculars, so it's pretty I would say, is pretty reputable suggestion.
Yeah, like they're not just guessing. Like they can see it. Like they're they're using whatever, like their police telescope.
Yeah,
not
the
just,
ball scope.
Not just buddy guys binoculars.
No. And so then we get, so we've got not a discrepancy with the lights, but we've got a differentiation of the lights. So we've got side lights that are blue and blinking at very rapid speeds. We've got a bottom light that's like basically covering the entire bottom, and it's like it started to glow brighter and brighter. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with energy transformations, or I don't even know what's going on.
Like building up for when it
for the
just
takeoff,
takes,
right?
Yeah, like
exactly.
pieces the scene.
Because that's what Charlie would do too, right? He would glow a really deep red color. It would turn into a white, and then he'd go poof, and just start shooting off into the ether.
Right.
But so we've got the blue colored lights on each side. We've got another light that's described as red and white on the top of the craft, blinking variously between the two colors. And then we've got silence. So there was no sound reported throughout this entire encounter that lasted hours. So that to me is huge. And again, very similar to a lot of other UFO cases.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I think that's definitely really important here is that it was casting a shadow, but as the time went on. Did we already mention that?
We did mention that at the very start.
Right.
So that's interesting too, because if this thing is floating at like 3,000 feet in the air. Sorry, approximately 1 to 3,000 feet. So we've got like 2,000 feet variation. But that is interesting, because that to me speaks to a very large craft. And depending on the position of the moon in the sky, like...
Well, I'm thinking this had to have been... Like how... Yeah, that's just it. Like we don't have the exact time when they say that. Because obviously, like 2 hour sighting, wee early hours of the morning, and then by the tail end of that 2 hours, the sun must have been coming up at this point. Is what I'm thinking, and that's what was casting, allowing for a shadow to be cast over top of this object, right? Not at the initial when Blackwood showed up first. Because
and another thing too that I'm thinking now is like, okay, so if this craft is emitting a huge light, white light from the bottom, you would think any shadow would just be obliterated by that.
You'd think,
but that's me in a very rudimentary understanding of shadows and lights. but anyway,
that is a good point, though. Actually,
it's all interesting. Like, yeah. So so that's the end of the encounter.
Yeah.
Yes. So I kind of just wanted to go over the weather conditions that evening.
Okay.
Because that obviously lends to a lot of credibility. Like, was there low clouds hanging in the sky? Obviously not, if they're describing a craft that's 2,000 to 3,000 feet up in the air.
Yeah, that would negate their story for sure.
Essentially, yeah. So, okay. This is sourced from the Nighttime podcast. I'm just going to read just a tiny bit of this here.
Sure.
This was from, not the official report, but it was a summary of the event.
Okay.
So essentially, quote, the sky was clear at this time, and the object was observed at an altitude of approximately 3,000 to 4,000 feet. The object was described as an oval shape with large triangular fin on top, completely red with white and blue flashing lights, and very bright. Anyways, end quote. I just thought that was interesting too, because they're clarifying what the conditions were. Obviously, this was a clear night. I'm not sure what stage the moon was at. They weren't that specific. Yeah, right. But that, to me, helps establish what the setting was. And
well, like, literally, it's funny you mentioned the moon. Literally, that was what one of the explanations was. It was that Blackwood was literally seeing the moon, the bottom half of the moon, like, partially covered by a cloud.
Oh.
And that just was, like, a cloud... And then, picture like a little sliver of the moon underneath as the light emanating. And I just think that's the dumbest explanation ever.
Okay.
Like, I'm not even going to bring that up in the theory section because that's really stupid.
You just brought... Okay,
well, it's not the theory section.
We're mentioning it now.
I'm just saying, because you mentioned the moon. So anyway, and that, I've seen that before, right? Where people just think like, it's like, oh, you're just seeing a weird atmospheric change, or you're seeing a cloud, or you're seeing the sun. It's like, no.
That irks me. I don't like that.
No.
But another thing too about this quote that is sort of another discrepancy here is the idea that they're saying 3,000 to 4,000 feet. So now we're getting quotes of 1 to 2 to 3,000 to 4,000. So there's like a big range of how, but I would say just for... I don't even know. For a base standard, I'd say it's at least 1,000 feet in the air.
Obviously. But I think 1,000 feet's not that high up. Really.
No?
No, not for an aircraft.
I guess not. That's like what, like 350 meters?
It's really not that far in the air. I mean, at a distance added to that, that's a whole other can of worms, right? If you're not directly underneath this thing.
That's true.
But the other thing about being at a distance from it, like looking at it on, like I said earlier, maybe like a 45-degree or whatever angle it is out towards the object, you have more reference points that way. You've got reference points from the island it's above. You've got reference points from...
That's very true.
Potentially clouds that are noticeably closer to you, right? Where you can see like, okay, that's about however many clicks away. Whereas if you're right underneath it and there's no frame of reference above you, that is the quintessential like critique of UFO sightings, right? And also for like giant bird sightings and things like that, like in the Thunderbirds episode.
And another thing too, just again to add to Blackwood's credibility, is the idea that as a police officer, you definitely are more well versed with those types of judgments, right? Because you know, when you're in a situation when a crime's happening or you see a suspect, like you need to be able to quick reference, like he was 5 to 6 feet tall, he was this or whatever, like, you know, like that type of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I don't know. I just think that's an interesting point, right? Because we have this established, right? This is a clear night.
Yeah.
Nothing going on.
Nothing going on.
So before we get into the official explanation and some of our sort of theories, we're just going to stop for a quick promo break from our friends over at the Dark Remnants podcast.
Yeah, so Dark Remnants podcast is all about horror stories, creepy stories. So basically, if you're into sci-fi, Lovecraft, creepypasta, things like that, you'll definitely love the show. So take a listen to this promo and go check out Dark Remnants podcast.
These are the dark fringes of our world, the pieces forgotten, the Dark Remnants. Dark Remnants is a podcast that features horror stories. These stories may be scary, brutal, odd, creepy, or just plain weird. If you're a fan of horror, dark sci-fi, Lovecraft, or creepypasta, then join me every other Saturday for a new tale to tell. You can find Dark Remnants wherever you get your podcast, or visit darkremnants.com. Come and join us in the dark.
All right. So in the days following the encounter, we are obviously going to get some official explanations on this. And one of the first people that reached out was the spokesperson from the Canadian Armed Forces. And they commented at the time, I think it was within a few weeks, and they said that they had looked into their systems and they could come up with no indications of any sort of aircraft in the area at the time of the incident. So, of course, this is a stretch of a few hours. So that actually gives them more leeway, more playtime to kind of work with, right? I would imagine.
Definitely.
And just the fact that it wasn't a rainy night, so there wouldn't be anything clouding up the radar or anything like that.
Right.
Because we came across that again, right, when we were talking about the Great Lakes Triangle and the Felix Moncla case, where basically was he RCAF? He was...
That's a good...
I believe he was. He was in a fighter jet, and when he disappeared over the Great Lakes, and his plane was never found, he was never found, and there's been no official resolution to that case.
No, and of course he reported a craft.
He did. He reported anomalies in the sky, something following him, essentially.
I believe that's how the story went, right? And we're not confusing that with another one, right? And they picked it up on the radar, and when we were talking to Chris during that bonus episode, he mentioned, Chris from Dash of Science, that sometimes birds, like flocks of birds, would pick up on the radar. Yeah. But of course, there's nothing on the radar in this case at Clarenville, and clearly it's not a flock of birds because Blackwood would know.
Exactly. So that was interesting. So they didn't really have an explanation other than the fact that they just couldn't offer one. Right. And then we get another branch of the government in Ottawa, the National Research Council, and they had actually at the time had a upper atmosphere program that was essentially responsible for reporting on UFOs and stuff. So they became involved in this case. Okay. And essentially they were of the mind that the sightings were a simple misidentification of the planet Jupiter. Yes. So this NRC agent, his name was A.G. McNamara, he responded to these reports, and he said that essentially the planet Jupiter is brilliant in mid-October when near the Mediterranean Sea. And so his reasoning was that at this time of night, the position of Jupiter in the sky was so low that it could actually be mistaken for a terrestrial object.
Huh.
Which is bizarre to me too, because if you are going to take into account the shadow,
there's that, yeah.
And the lights, how does a planet blink multiple colors of lights?
Well, and like distinctly on either side.
Yeah.
Like blue
and then it's
on
rotating,
either side.
right?
And also dull metallic, like material.
Yeah.
That seems strange.
None of it adds up to me.
No.
And Blackwood was pretty pissed about this. Like, it was kind of funny.
Yeah, read this quote, man. That's awesome.
I love this. He's like, Blackwood, it just says here, Blackwood disagreed. Quote, I tore a strip off him. He had this big explanation, but he didn't talk to me or any of the other 12 witnesses, Blackwood told the packet. He just surmised this on his own. There was this guy doing a paper on it. I told him what I thought of him. How the hell can a planet cast a shadow on the water? How can it come down that close that it can block out Random Island?
It can't, is the simple answer to that question.
That's crazy. So it blocked out the island for them.
Their view of the island.
Yeah.
So that's coming quite low.
That's low and
coming.
quite close.
So that matches up with the 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
obviously we can take from those discrepancies that there's it's changing altitude. Right? So like when he perceives it as moving slightly up and down, that could actually be quite a lot more than a few hundred feet or whatever they're thinking it is from a distance or whatever, right?
Exactly.
And then over the course of however many, half hour of the 2 hours or whatever, it's all of a sudden quite a lot higher up in the air.
Yeah. You never know.
I don't know.
Be,
yeah.
Okay. So essentially, where are we at here?
Well, we're basically at, we've talked a little bit about Blackwood's credibility, but I mean, where are you at with that? He was a younger officer. He was only 25 years old at the time, but he had been on the force for a few years. It's not like he was a rookie. It wasn't his first day on the job or anything like that. So, he had nothing to gain from this. He didn't, other than going on BBC and CBC, which he didn't even want to do. His superiors told him to do that. And I've got some questions about that. Like, one, why would the police department want to draw attention to them on something like that? Why wouldn't they just turn down those interviews? Like, do you think that they were like, not pressured, but maybe kind of nudged by the local community to like take the interviews? Like, we need the tourism, or like we need the press, or something like that.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? Like,
I was almost going to go the opposite, where I was like, this is like Men in Black, where they're like, you need to. I don't even know.
But that'd be the opposite, though. It'd be like you've got to clam up about it.
Well, either clam up or a campaign of misinformation.
Okay, possibly.
But you're right, though. Like, the fact that he was so young, he really had nothing to gain and everything to lose.
Yeah.
And he did become a pariah to a lot of people in the community. He was the laughingstock for a while.
And amongst other cops.
He didn't want to be that.
No.
He's this young guy, he's trying to make a name for himself, and he's just starting his career.
That's so funny, too. It's like literally BBC, CBC, multiple local newspapers, provincial newspapers and news networks, national news networks. Like he was interviewed so many times about this, and he never even wanted to.
No, and now that's his legacy essentially. And it's interesting too because like Pat Roach, this was a reporter from the Telegram. They wrote a piece about the incident shortly after, describing Blackwood as, quote, the first shred of credibility to the mushrooming reports of UFOs. Right. So that to me again speaks to exactly that. The idea that this witness is someone that I can't cast much doubt on, because I can't find much reason for... At
least at the time, anyway. He would later leave Clarenville and move to Nova Scotia, where he kind of took on an interesting sort of local celebrity status in the town in Nova Scotia as essentially the raccoon whisperer.
Yep. So he had like a pack of like...
saving raccoons.
I think it was up to 30 raccoons would show up on his door every night. He stays up till like 3 a.m. just to feed these things. And it's all out of the goodness of his heart, because it started with his wife. Once they moved to Nova Scotia, she found a nearly dead raccoon on the side of the road, and they took it in, raised it, and got it back to health, and released it, semi-released it. It always came back, though. It was attached to them. And then essentially a few years passed, and then it brought its baby to them as well. And they would come and they would eat like PB&J sandwiches or like whatever was on. Like they would go all out for these raccoons.
Right.
And then his wife unfortunately died of cancer in the early 2000s, and so it was kind of all he had left of her, and so he just decided he would. That just speaks to his character, though, in my mind.
To continue on doing it.
Yeah.
Like, when I first read that, and before I looked into it, it was like, like, did this guy lose his marbles? But no, he didn't. He was really, he's a humanitarian. Or, not humanitarian, he's
an animalitarian.
Yeah, he's a philanthropist of sorts, giving away the PB&Js to the animal creatures. Yeah, no, He
even gets them, like, Tim Hortons donuts. Yeah.
Are you serious?
Every Saturday night they get donuts.
God. I wish I was one of these raccoons, man. That doesn't sound
they're
too
well
bad.
fed.
So he's out in Nova Scotia at this point, and he's been interviewed in his later years about this as well. And he always has the same things to say. His story hasn't changed.
No, and he was interviewed quite recently for the Nighttime podcast, where we sourced a lot of primary sources and excellent materials. Thank you to
definitely
to them over there.
I'm forgetting names, but like, shout out to it's great, really, really well researched.
Another Canadian podcast,
yes,
I
absolutely.
believe. Yes, very cool. But yeah, so they got together and did a phone interview with Blackwood, and yeah, he didn't have any discrepancies really with this. It's just a simple story, and like the more he tells it, it's just is what it is.
Yeah. There's one aspect of it here, though, that you were going to talk about that's sort of not fishy. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's some alleged photographs from the incident that haven't really surfaced.
No, this is interesting because they haven't been found. They haven't been included in anything. Right. They've never surfaced on the internet. I don't really know what was made of them, but essentially we got this from the unofficial, like, Newfoundland, Clarenville website.
Yes.
And so essentially this is a quote here. It says, after observing for more than 5 minutes, one officer turned on the cruiser lights, and the disc responded by flashing back via lights on its body. So the officer being Blackwood.
Right.
After a few variations on the light flashing sequence, the officer took a camera from the car and photographed the object. The object departed. It is claimed that the two officers, so Blackwood and the guy that brought the scope to him, went to the station and called their staff sergeant. A full report was completed, and both the report and the camera film were placed in an envelope, then put into the detachment safe. This envelope may have been removed a couple days later by officers from another detachment or office. End quote. So, what? Like,
why would officers from another detachment or office be taking documents from a different detachment? That doesn't make any sense.
It's fishy. And so I was just really confused by that statement, and the fact that we don't actually get corroboration from Blackwood that he took those photos.
He never mentioned that in the interview.
No. So in my mind, this could be one of two things. This could be a mistake, a misnomer on the part of this recollection, like, because this is an unofficial Clarenville UFO website, so again, right, like, it could be just something to sort of pump up the mythology of it. I'm not sure, add some sort of like conspiracy element, like a Men in Black, like, I don't know. But it could be legit. I don't know.
Maybe the confusion was that the photos could have been taken by the residents that called and then got misplaced or weren't good enough to keep, or maybe they weren't, you know what I mean, like, clear.
This is the 70s, and I'm sure that a lot of cameras, like the police cameras, would have been quite good, I would imagine.
Sure, but they still wouldn't have been. It still just would have been regular old film, and, like, subject to if the light's not quite right on that. You know what I mean? Like the classic where you take a picture and there's a UFO in the corner, but no, that's just film.
Exactly, or even just that, right, where it's just you get a tiny little speck. The photo is like, that's just nothing. I don't even know what that is.
It's an orb.
It's an orb, yep.
So, what are your... Okay, so we were going to kind of break down... We already have a little, but, like, what the heck are we dealing with in this sighting? Like, what are these people actually seeing? So we've given a bit of the shapes and stuff, and we were like, hey, well, what do we know... What have we looked at in the past that we can reference? And we've mentioned Charlie Red Star, and I think there's a ton of similarities beyond just the lights. So you've got the flashing communication, that's one thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned the cuttlefish as basically a metaphor for that, which is really
Yeah, totally. And then there were some erratic movements, right? Not too many. Like, especially when he was like, it almost seemed as if it was a straight projectile through the sky initially when Blackwood had showed up. But we don't know that. It could have maybe had some sort of bobbing. Who knows?
Right.
But we're not going to just put that in there.
Totally.
I'm not going to assume that was there.
No.
But anyways, they also described something kind of similar to Charlie. Okay, we're getting back to that triangle / pyramid shape on the sort of top / back of the craft.
Sure.
What I kind of thought was, with the Charlie Red Star case, there were a lot of times where witnesses would describe seeing one sort of like mother craft and then similar craft either orbiting around it in like kind of like a figure 8 motion, or almost like docking onto the craft.
Yes.
And then undocking after and like departing away.
That's so weird.
I know, right? It's just like almost like a fueling up. Like, what if that is the fuel ship? And then they like, anyways, these little tiny bots just go and do their thing.
That makes sense.
And then come back. But so what I was thinking was like, what if this could have been a secondary craft like docked on top or on the side of the initial craft, sort of similar to this Charlie scenario. But this is, again, just all conjecture.
It's all conjecture, but it's like, whatever. That's what we have to do with the information we can work with here.
Totally.
That would make sense if there's some sort of, like a reconnaissance vehicles that are, like it's a refueling dock of some kind. Because otherwise, because that's one thing with UFOs that I've always wondered, like, and whether or not we're talking nuts and bolts craft from distance or interdimensional or whatever, it's like, the size of them is always curious to me. It's like, if you're doing reconnaissance or something like that, it's like, well, why would it be so big? It's not like that thing's packed full of like 300 extraterrestrial passengers coming along for the ride or something like that. Or is it a giant?
Is it
like
the system?
Laboratory? You know what I mean? Like,
totally. Yeah. Is there equipment for testing? Is it simply a case of they need that for like energy storage and conversion, or like, I'm not sure, something along those lines.
Or are they physically just that much larger in certain cases, and it's like one guy hanging out in there? That's like one ship. It's like a solo ship. It's like a little one-seater car, except we see it as like a Boeing 747.
That could be the case. Interestingly, another sort of comparable case is this Falcon Lake incident of 1967. So this was a case, a close encounter, where there was a single witness who witnessed a craft very similar shape. You get that sort of classic, like the two pie plates kind of pushed together, like more of an oval, whatever.
More of the saucer.
More of a saucer. There you go, saucer.
I'm reluctant to use that term, but...
Well, I just didn't even think of it. That's a good term to use. But anyways, so essentially he saw a craft descend and land in this Falcon Lake incident. He walked up to the craft and it was like emitting this like gross sulfury smell, and it was really hot too. He ended up getting burned quite extensively when the craft took off again.
By the exhaust.
But essentially what he saw, I'm just like, I was just, my memory was jogged by you saying like, what if there's just a single person? There's really big. But essentially he actually got close enough to see an opening. It was like a door-like aperture. And then within that he saw basically a huge array of lights. It was like a maze of lights. And then within that, he could hear two voices. One was significantly higher pitched than the other. And so there was definitely two beings in that craft. And I think it was a very similar size too. I'm not going to say that's a positive, but it was very similar shaped and very...
interesting.
Yeah. A lot of similarities, right? Yeah. And again, this was near a water source.
Right. And then, like you mentioned again earlier, we had the Maury Island incident above water, which is the same as this too. And so that's the question. It's like, what is up with that? I mean, in the Maury Island incident, we had this ejection of some sort of clearly a spent substance, like whether it was fuel, residue, or whatever. And we have other instances of UFOs being witnessed sucking up water, even if it's not just fresh water, salt water too.
Yep.
And that's bizarre.
Yeah, the Australian case was really weird.
Yeah.
I can't remember what year that one was. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. I mean, all these kind of deserve their own episodes in and of themselves. But they're worth mentioning, just to give context to this 1978 sighting.
Exactly.
There's another one I really wanted to mention here because It's close by, and there's a few of them here, and that I'm going to bring up. But and again, this deserves its own full episode, but it's because it's really famous. Another Canadian incident, the Shag Harbour UFO crash,
which we actually did discuss.
We did discuss it in minor detail.
Yes, in our cross-country paranormal checkup tour with Double Density.
Yes,
or what did we call that? The Great Canadian.
Oh, what did we call?
Oh no, the Great White North. Legends of the Great White North.
Yes, that's right.
That was it.
Yeah, so we covered a whole bunch of cool stuff on that episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, we touched on Shag Harbour. We'll probably eventually do a full episode on it too.
I would love to.
But essentially what that was one of the most prolific accounts, definitely on the East Coast, if not the entire country of Canada for sure. This was a decade earlier. So this is 1967, October 4th, shortly after 11 p.m., witnesses reported a UFO that was estimated about 60 feet in diameter. So this is that shape that you were just describing, like the saucer, essentially, right? This is not the cigar shape. Hovering over the water, and then the people who witnessed this reported seeing the object basically just plunge into the water. So 4 bright lights flashed in a
crash landing.
Yeah, essentially 4 bright lights flashed in a uniform pattern. So that's kind of a similar. That's another similarity too. So after hovering for several minutes, it tilted and quickly descended towards the water, like almost on purpose.
Right.
And so I think a lot of conspiracy theorists and sort of fringe people were thinking like, well, what's at the bottom of this?
The Shag, at the bottom of the harbor.
People believe there's underwater UFO bases all over the world.
They do. Oh yeah.
So,
there's some reported all over, like in the Gulf of Mexico.
Absolutely, off the coast of California, there was one I think we mentioned in one of our earlier episodes.
UFOs and water, they do mix.
Definitely. So that was just. Yeah, unrelated, obviously, but about a decade before. So this was in the public consciousness, and just the similarity here again, NORAD had no idea of the incident.
So claimed they had no idea of the incident.
Claimed they had no idea, which is pretty curious, right? So like you have the Ministry of Defense and NORAD saying, wait, what? There was nothing in the sky. We didn't have anything on.
So there was a bright flash and an explosion. What I was trying to picture in my head was like, okay, so this craft is going at like a 45-degree angle and into the water.
Yeah. I'm
like picturing it like, when you have a really hot pan and you just pour water in it, like I'm imagining like the steam rising from like the point of contact, but that didn't really seem to happen. It was literally an explosion.
Yeah.
That's
but
crazy.
there was no remnants left. All that was left when they went out there, because there was first responders because they were
right, because they were responding to an emergency.
Yeah, they thought it was an actual, like a plane crash or something. And all that was on the water from the brief scan I did was like a foam.
Oh.
It's like an orange foam or something like that.
Really?
So my question with this is obviously, this is 10 years before, very, very close by. Besides the water, like, is there any connection here at all? I don't really know.
We will never know.
It's interesting.
We'll never know.
Then we've got a few more modern ones too. So there's another one in Newfoundland, 1985 at Gander Lake. And I kind of just pulled this as sort of a rough quote. And I actually don't have the name of the gentleman. This was sort of seen as possibly a hoax. But there's some similarities to Clarenville, so I wanted to mention it. So basically it's 3 brothers. They were out fishing on Gander Lake near Bear Cave Road, which is located behind Indian Bay, Newfoundland. So they're camped on the edge of the lake, and it was just after dawn. The following morning, he gets up to head out for some early morning fishing. He sees a large object hovering over the tree line about 1 kilometer away. So it appeared to be about 100 meters or more across. So that's massive. So we're getting back into the territory of the Clarenville object.
Yeah.
It reflected some sunlight, but it appeared to be dull coloration, dull metallic. It remained motionless without making a sound. So again, very similar. He went to alert his brother, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to skip over some of this stuff because I'm getting to the similarities.
Yeah.
It remained motionless. So it's still motionless. And then, lo and behold, blue lights. So it started flashing blue lights on either side of the object and then took away at a high velocity. So
crazy.
Very, very similar, obviously, to a lot of UFOs.
I love the way he ends this account. He says, to this day, I cannot get this experience out of my mind.
Yeah.
Because he can't explain it.
Right.
It's like, that would drive you insane.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Definitely. And then it just keeps happening.
There's
definitely other reports through the later end of the 80s and the 90s and stuff, but, we can't sit here all day. There's definitely some other ones. 2010, Harbour Mill, Newfoundland. This one's really weird. Okay. And I don't know if it's connected to Clarenville, but things kind of seem to happen over this area of Newfoundland. So Harbour Mill is just south of Clarenville. And multiple people on January 25th of 2010 reported seeing 3 objects, basically missile-like UFOs, fly near their community. And one of the women who witnessed this was able to take a photograph of one of them, and we'll have that up. We'll have the link in our sources.
Cool.
And it's really weird. So they reported this to the RCMP, that they had seen 3 missiles, quote, soaring over the ocean, and it looked like they had come up and out of the water. So they didn't have a, right? So it's like
another element of
this
water.
thing's coming up from underneath the water. Then, okay, and then there was a report obtained from the Department of National Defense from the CBC, and this is a quote. The unidentified flying objects spotted in January off Newfoundland remain a mystery to the government, despite extensive scrutiny. According to the Department of National Defense, documents obtained by CBC, and these documents do contain this grainy image of a rocket, they basically rule out missiles, model rockets, or anything alike as an explanation for the event. They go on to say that D&Ds, so what's this called? The Directorate of Scientific and Technical Intelligence assessed the images and basically said the object is not a ballistic missile, not a cruise missile in boost phase, nor a cruise missile in mid-flight phase. It is also not a licensed model rocket launchers. There's no explanation for it.
So either someone was launching a rocket or multiple rockets out of their own barn, like they were like inspired by that. Like, remember that movie that was that astronaut that was actually a farmer and he like builds a rocket in his barn?
Yes, vaguely. What was that?
I can't remember. I think Matt Damon was in it though. I could be wrong. Anyways, that kind of reminds me of that.
It definitely does. And then of course NORAD was unaware.
Okay, so NORAD's unaware. Was there anything ever recovered? Like, as far as... No? So, no material?
Nothing ever recovered. NORAD said in a statement they had no idea that it was even in their airspace at all, and they are the ones responsible for monitoring that airspace. So it's essentially it was up to the RCMP, who were left to comment, and they just stated that it was left as an unidentified sighting because there was nothing more to go on. Or at least so they say, from
That's
NORAD
crazy.
and the Ministry of National Defense.
So that happened in 2010, hey? And then you get 6 years later, another incident in Harbour Mill.
Yes.
And this was reported to CBC, actually. A woman by the name of Darlene Stewart. She spotted an object coming out of the ocean while she was taking pictures of the sunset at Harbour Mill. And this was in September.
Yep.
So we're getting multiple sightings of the same phenomena.
In the fall. So October, September, whatever. So this is close to the same time and close to the same area as Clarenville. Clearly something's interested in this area. Whether it's just for the water or for other things that are located beneath the surface or beneath the soil.
And you can't just explain that away as a sighting of Jupiter in the sky. Because, like, even if it is, like, that does correspond to what the upper atmosphere people said, as, like, those are, like, the months that you would see it.
Yeah.
But, you know what's interesting, too? Same year, 2016, February, so we're not in that fall range anymore.
Right.
There was another sighting in Clarenville.
Really?
Yeah. And I thought this was super interesting. There wasn't too much to go on with this, but there was an article... I can't remember the news outlet that actually reported on this off the top of my head, but essentially this guy named Chad Haynes saw a UFO hovering in the night sky for several hours. He claimed that it zigzagged up and down before shooting off, just like what Blackwood witnessed. And also what was witnessed with Charlie Red Star on several occasions, where he would just literally, there was almost like they're powering up,
and then
just
gone.
Boom. Just
so the question is that the same craft?
Right? Is it this? Yeah. Are there multiple crafts? Is it the same? What if this is Charlie in a different neck of the woods?
Yeah.
Because Charlie actually, too, he would change shapes. He would be seen as like a rectangle. He would change from a rectangle into a ball, into a disc. Like, it was like kind of crazy and a lot more fluid.
Right. Which
was like, it's like, is that like a mirage? Is he like projecting something? Could you imagine? Okay, this is an interesting thought. What if everything that we see that's like a UFO is actually a simple projection from another object that's not visible in the sky, that's a distraction from what the actual object's doing? Because they're always doing these weird things and like almost just so erratic and so unexplainable and irrational.
Well, clearly it's a good distraction.
But essentially, I don't even know. That's my little...
No, that's a... Hey, it's all open
for
interpretation, right?
So let's just say, like, I just this UFO sighting back in the 70s had a huge impact on the community of Clarenville.
Definitely.
They named their hockey team the UFOs after this happened.
The Clarenville UFOs.
And they they're riding on it, like, as far as tourism and stuff, so good for them, I guess, but, like, at the same time, like, I'm not going to say that that takes away from any of the reliability of that.
No, definitely not, because I don't think that really came to be until, a little after.
Yeah.
Until it had time to sink in.
Exactly.
And kind of become more of a mainstream thing.
Yeah.
Where you're going to name your hockey team after it, you know what I mean? Because people, like, even to go back to Charlie, like, people didn't take it seriously in the 70s.
Not really.
Right? It wasn't until later, and until very recently with Grant Cameron's book, that the story even really came out.
There definitely were people that did take it seriously, especially that one family that lost about, 150 head of horses.
Okay, yeah,
unexplained, right. And that could be a totally different, unrelated crime or anything like that, but, there was very few. You're right. The majority of people, they gave him the nickname Charlie, and they were like, you know what, man, that's just a good old red ball in the sky that comes every night on his little beer run.
Yeah, it just became this
Yeah.
Normal thing. Mm-hmm. We're kind of migrating into our theories and thoughts section now. And I mean, we've gone through stuff throughout the episode here, like what we think, more or less. But I was trying to find things that this could possibly be connected to. Like when I was trying to come up with theories and stuff, I was like, you know, why over Random Island? Why Newfoundland? And we gave these other examples in the area, Nova Scotia and Harbour Mill. Mm-hmm. But in the exact same year, there was a few other events, totally disparate locations in the world.
Okay.
But I'm just going to mention them anyway, just for sake of conversation, because it's kind of interesting. There was one really famous case that happened just 6 days prior to the Clarenville sighting, and this was the disappearance of an Australian pilot, 20-year-old, by the name of Frederick Valentich. So this was October 21st, 1978. He was flying a Cessna 182-liter light aircraft and was allegedly a moderately experienced pilot. He had about 150 plus hours of flying time. Mm-hmm. But this is interesting because it's similar to like the Felix Moncla. So he's flying. He radios into the Melbourne Flight Service to report an unidentified aircraft following him at around 4,500 feet. Mm-hmm. So that's just a little bit higher than the top point of the Clarenville craft. Mm-hmm. The service told him that there was nothing in the air. There's no traffic near him at the time. But he insisted that he could see this large unknown craft near him, which appeared to have 4 bright landing lights, all illuminated as he passed by it. And it was about 1,000 feet above him as it passed over at a high rate of speed. Okay. So for about another few minutes, he kept reporting the aircraft's movements. Still no confirmation of this on the radar. He claimed, quote, it was orbiting him.
Ooh, that is so similar.
Weird, right?
Well, we saw those same sort of descriptions put forth by the pilots, right? In the Charlie Red Star UFO case.
Yes.
Where it was the same thing, where they're orbiting, there's non-ballistic motions, they're like jetting out in front of them, and then literally not even stopping, but just completely, they're just turned around going the opposite way in less than a microsecond kind of thing. That's crazy, orbiting. And then again, many things.
It's okay.
With Charlie, right, where I mentioned, right, where there would be smaller craft, like, orbiting the main craft, going in, like, these, like, these sort of figure 8 patterns. Right.
So there's a similarity to Charlie, which is very, very close Canadian connection to the Clarenville incident, just a year after. The similarities with this one, of course, this is way over in Australia, but it happened 6 days before, same year, 1978. He described it as metallic, but in this case, it was not so dull. It was more of a typically shiny metallic color, but still metal. So I don't know if you can call it a similarity. And then the lights on the side. Yeah,
the lights too.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying there's a connection. I'm just saying that this is happening at roughly the same time, and I find that interesting. Another notable UFO event from 1978 was the alleged abduction of a Polish man by the name of Jan Wolowski. This is like one of the most famous abduction cases in Poland, and this happened in May of 1978. So not in the fall, but same year. Just thought it was worth mentioning because I was just searching 1978. I was like, what? Is there any connections here? Like, what can I find? So that was interesting. So he claimed to be straight up abducted. Similar shaped craft. But yeah, 1978. Not a bad year for some UFO stuff. You got Charlie, you got this, you got Valentich, you got Clarenville, you got lots of stuff going on.
That's fascinating. I just had to quickly look up when Felix Moncla actually disappeared, and that was quite a bit earlier. It was 53.
Yeah.
And That's so crazy. I'm sorry, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that one.
Yeah, strange,
So
right?
he just disappeared.
Vanished.
His craft was never found. He was never found.
They just assumed that he had crashed into the ocean and lost. And now, of course, that deserves its own. Again, that's another one. Should have its whole own episode, and we'll dig deeper when we get around to that. Mm-hmm. But I was just very fascinated by the closeness in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I have to break it down. Well,
Okay.
I just want to ask you, what are your concluding thoughts on this case?
So my concluding thoughts are that I think Jim Blackwood is completely genuine in his sighting, and that he wasn't embellishing or not qualified enough to make that identification. So there's clearly, an extraterrestrial object, whether it's
Unidentified, yeah.
Unidentified. I mean, it's
Could
not
be of terrestrial origins.
just not human origins.
Right.
Could be terrestrial, yeah, for sure.
Could be of human origins too. You never know.
I mean, but that's just it. So I'm so fascinated by the no doors, no windows, no noticeable seams or bolts or
The
you know what I mean.
porous
This is not a
surfaces.
porous surface. It's like I'm almost of the mind that this is a entity in and of itself.
Oh, you're gonna go cryptozoological on me?
No, not cryptozoological, but I don't even know. The surface and the texture of it is so different than other UFO descriptions we've looked at and heard of. I'm thinking that this is something completely different. It's like a giant concrete ball floating in the air. It's like, how is that possible? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure what to make of this one, to be honest with you. What about you? Like, where are you at?
I'm definitely on the same page as you as far as my opinion on Blackwood. I just don't think he just doesn't seem like the type of person that would just fabricate this and then just live with it for the rest of his life too, you know what I mean? And just, anyways, if anything, I feel like he would have written a book if he really wanted to, capitalize on it. But I am of the mind, I'm still torn between thinking that this could be nuts and bolts craft, or this could be some sort of interdimensional entity or a being or craft
or reconnaissance of some kind,
or
like a
some
craft
sort
for
of
that.
Yeah, what if it's a autonomous sort of craft that's just kind of being sent as a probe, just like the classic sci-fi where it's like, we're gonna send probes to every single planet in this universe and see what comes back.
Well, we just posted an article on our Facebook group recently about the idea of a probe passing by Earth. There being that sort of cigar shaped, and then we had a friend comment on it and be like, that looks like a giant space doobie, and it kind of did. But that's the shape of a potential alien probe, so potentially that's what this could be.
Mm-hmm. I'm keeping open.
We're open.
I'm a little bit agnostic and uncertain, but I'm treading that line. Yeah.
Well, we want to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah.
Very, very curious. Mm-hmm. This was an interesting story because there's no trace evidence, there's no abduction, there's we're only given the basics, but it still became this big thing. And I think that's so fascinating.
It is interesting, and it is a very simple story too, because you don't get a lot of aftermath like you do get with some other UFO cases where it's say the Men in Black show up and present a whole new set of variables. The only thing I could think of that would be remotely conspiratorial would be perhaps the missing photos, if they actually existed, if they were even worth anything, if they were just literally depicting the night sky and you can't even see anything.
Right.
So that to me is an area of, it's a little bit blurry, but interesting though.
Yeah, very.
Mm-hmm. If anyone else has any information on this case that we haven't discussed, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can always get at us at intotheportalmailbox@gmail.com. And we're also always active on our socials. Hey, Andrew, our Into the Portal 1 on Twitter.
Yep. And at Into the Portal Podcast on Instagram, and at Into the Portal Podcast on Facebook. Click the group, come join it.
Yeah.
Chat about UFOs.
And we've also got, I just wanted to, we said we were going to announce what film we were going to do for this Film Friday.
Yes.
And we did decide on The Void.
Okay. The Void.
And just you decided on The Void.
Okay. No, I'm cool with it. That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. The Void it is.
I guess.
No, I mean, hey, that's right on the right on topic.
We got a schedule, okay?
Yeah.
But we actually haven't seen this movie yet, so we are going to be viewing this for the first time this week.
Yeah.
And we're excited to talk about it. So look forward to an all new Film Friday happening this week.
Absolutely.
And then until next Sunday, we'll be back with a brand new episode.
Sounds good.
podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.
Also, as well, I believe it was actually the wee hours of the morning of October 27th, because the sighting occurred at approximately